everyone. I am Christine Gritmon here with Social. This is a show that I do every week where I talk to my smart friends about different topics relating to social media, small business, all that jazz. And today I am here with smart friend Jeff Howell. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great, Christine. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, pretty well. But we were talking before about the
Hmm.
fact that, you know what, you don't always have to be doing well.
No.
And the way that you can really social media is a highlight reel, right? Social media, we're seeing everyone's best and brightest. Everyone wants to kind of celebrate the good. It's not necessarily a bad thing, honestly. I personally enjoy putting more energy towards the things I'm happy about, but we forget often when it comes to other people. We know that we're putting forth the highlight reel sometimes. We forget
Hmm.
that other people, we see the good and we forget that that's not the whole picture. We don't notice what
Right.
people don't say. So, today Jeff and I are going to talk about that, about the fact that, you know, social media is a really great opportunity for connection and building real relationships. But sometimes first we have to get past that sense of I'm the only one going through hard times or our own vulnerabilities, stuff like that. So, Jeff, first, before we actually dig into all that, can you just really quickly tell people, you know, who you are and what you do?
Cool. Yeah, well, I'm Jeff, and I do a lot of different things. Most of my time is spent just sort of building relationships online with people.
Good thing to do.
Exactly. I did a lot of marketing in the past, so spent a lot of time doing social and spent a lot of time helping individuals with their branding or with their social branding on telling unique stories and helping them be vulnerable in that respect. More recently, my career has shifted into doing like e-commerce development, which is really cool. And
Very
I'm sort
important
of
right now,
it
especially.
is absolutely, and we're busier than we have been in a long time. I think mostly because of that, people are going online to get everything they need. And so one of the things I've been working on is also trying to translate sort of what I'm doing currently with e-commerce and finding a way to parlay that into like um, marketing conversations as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of something I'm working on a little bit behind the scenes to try and figure that out, and then do some public speaking here and there. And you know, I do a lot of different things, but mostly I think that the most important thing for me is just the relationship building and using a lot of my experience in the past with a variety of different things, both online and even just through you know seeing mental health professionals and things like that. Just sort of how does that all come together?
And how does that all come together? Let's back up a little and talk about that relationship building online component.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of sense of when that started becoming a focus for you?
It's been a long time actually. I would say 2008, 2009. I think I started really getting into it. Um, I had a friend of mine who I knew when we lived in Minnesota. Her name was Jennifer Keene, and she spent a lot of time doing um, public relations and branding. But one of her big focuses was on how to capture enough attention with your branding and your messaging, and a lot of it was doing data research on finding the best times that people were engaging with your content and things like that, which is what most marketers do. But one of the things that she hit on was it's not enough just to know when the right time to post that content where you're going to get the most people viewing it, but it's what you do after that. And it's when you get those people looking and viewing your content, how do you follow up with them? How do you talk to them? How do you engage with them after you know that they have viewed your things?
And that is so
It
key because so many people they feel like the content is the thing. And the
mhm,
content is not the thing. The content is
right.
what leads to the thing, which is the relationship building.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a little bit different than just your normal sales or marketing funnel. It wasn't just, taking them to a landing page, getting their information and contacting them to, take them from an MQL to an SQL. That's not what she was referring to. I think she was really referring into, okay, so now that you've got this person's information or you know that that person has viewed what you've painstakingly put together to put out online, you ask them what did they think about it, or ask them why did they view it, or what did they get most out of what that piece of content, and that's the important piece. So, 10, 12 years ago, that really resonated with me. And so the whole idea of engaging with people online and not being afraid to share things online sort of became something that really resonated with me. And over time, having a good understanding of what my own sort of mental makeup is through, seeing counselors and seeing people who kind of help me navigate, just normal day-to-day life, was able to find a way to sort of incorporate some of that into not just helping others share their story, but sharing mine a little bit, and kind of getting over the barrier of not being afraid to share things that are meaningful to other people. Because everybody has that one thing or a few things that they've gone through in their life that you're like, well, why did I go through this? Or what can I do to is this important enough to share to other people? Or does anybody else really care about something I've gone through? And what I found is that everybody has gone through something that may not necessarily be just for you. What you've gone through might also make a huge impact for somebody else. They may need to hear that story or that piece of content that you have to share that was meaningful to you, and it might help them get through something else in their life. And being able to be vulnerable and to put yourself out there in a space that can sometimes be a little bit scary, your ability to do that ultimately helps other people, whether you know it or not.
That's hugely important. And it's the idea of using your voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that it can be tricky to find those lines, those comfort levels, as anyone, as any human, even if you're just engaging on social media personally. It can be tricky to find those lines of how much of yourself you bring to the table and how much you show. It can be doubly hard to figure out where that comfort level is when you're also using social media professionally, because there's this idea that you have to present a certain image.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, there are a few people that we know that kind of do it. That kind of do it in a really good way. Fanzo's a really good guy that
Yeah.
I kind of see as, and Chris Strub too. Those two guys will obviously share their things about what they're doing professionally, but they're also not afraid to kind of crack open the door a little bit and let people see behind the curtain. Especially um, different relationships that Brian has been involved in, and Chris, for instance, they his relationships and sometimes struggle with travel. They're not afraid to open that up and share those stories and being a little bit vulnerable in that respect, because then they are able to make their personal brand, a little bit more approachable, a little bit more human.
Yeah, I was really impressed when Chris had reached a certain level of success and he had,
Mm-hmm.
big followings, he had his books out, he had the movie out, and then he came on and very publicly said, "Hey, I'm co-managing a Sbarro pizza. I am driving
Right.
Uber." And
Yeah.
he's like, "You know what? Having attention and having followers is not quite the same as having
Right.
money." And he
Yeah.
was very open
Exactly.
about that. And at this point, he has reached a point in his career where he's not doing those day jobs anymore. He is, at this point, able to sustain himself on this digital stuff, but it has
Right.
taken years. And he doesn't take it for
Mm-hmm.
granted at all. He completely
No,
leaves that door open for the fact that if he needs to drive Uber again, he's going to drive Uber again.
it's gonna drive it. Yeah.
And that's
And
refreshing.
that vulnerability, it is refreshing, but also makes him more approachable too,
Yeah.
because it makes him genuine.
And it makes you want to
Like,
root for him, too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there are some people that we know that promote themselves that, hey, everything's okay, and they don't have that one thing that they say that they struggle with, or they kind of appear to be like they have everything together, and you wonder, like, see, there was a time I think where you didn't really want to share sort of the chinks in the armor that you had.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to promote that persona of being perfect or whatever. because that vulnerability, can be attributed to showing weakness. And I think the opposite is true, where it actually shows strength when you're being vulnerable, that you're willing to put yourself into a position where you might capture some negative attention, but it doesn't matter because your vulnerability equals some strength, and it almost is a sign of weakness where you're trying to cover that up, and people can see right through that.
Yeah.
If you kind of appear to have everything together, look, we know better. We know that there's things that you struggle with. Why won't you just share it at some point?
And there's also,
It doesn't have to.
go ahead.
I say it doesn't have to be out in public, like what we were talking about earlier, before we came on, where a lot of the things I might be vulnerable sharing had been on my personal, like on my regular wall, but I found that groups are becoming a much bigger avenue for me to engage and to be real and authentic, but also being able to target who I'm sharing that content with.
Absolutely, and that's a really good point. We have Amy Aram in my watch party comments, by the way. She says being vulnerable allows people to connect to you, and
Yeah.
that's very true because we're afraid to bring our whole selves to people who we think are perfect.
Right.
Whereas if you have told a story that I can connect with, I mean, I'm not going to go and blow up your personal life here, but the fact is, I remember when you were on stage at Social Media Week Lima,
Yeah.
you told a story that kind of spoke to something that I had been hiding,
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't even know it, but I was just like, oh my god, I never would have guessed that that was a concern for him too.
Mm-hmm.
And it can really make you feel safer, and it can really lead to those connections. Another example, I mean, this is a very um, specialized example, but it's a weird example. But the fact is, miscarriages.
Yeah.
Miscarriages, I think, are a great example of this, which is that people don't really talk about them, but now thanks to social media, there's like an awareness day or a remembrance
Mm-hmm.
day or something, and suddenly
Yeah.
you get whole threads of people telling their stories, and you're like, holy crap, this has happened to like everybody. Why not,
Right.
and it's interesting because when you're going through it, it feels like a weird thing. It feels like you don't go and announce it,
Right.
because it's like, who wants to hear about that? That's personal, that's private. But then on these days, and these comment threads, suddenly everybody's talking about it, and it's like,
Right.
wow, you never would have guessed. But sorry, that was a bit of a tangent.
No, that's great, and I appreciate the added comments because it just fulfills the picture that we're trying to paint here on that sense of vulnerability. See, that isolating yourself and thinking that nobody wants to hear what I have to say um, is not just detrimental to the people who need to hear what you have to say, but it's to yourself. You start closing yourself up, you start closing yourself in, and then that sense of fear then becomes a much stronger voice in your head. Like
And you can't lead
there,
if your head is full of fear, and you can't help other
yeah,
people if your head is full of fear.
yeah, exactly.
And there's a
So,
judgment inherent in that. There's a judgment. It's saying, this is a part of me, this is a part of my life that is not worthy of being shared.
yeah, when actually the opposite is true, and I think there was a time where just putting all your stuff out on, say, Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, broadcasting it, was sort of the way to do it. That's where you captured some attention, where you got some other people thinking, oh, that resonates me, that story resonates with me. But being able to kind of identify some Facebook groups, which are becoming, I think, the way to communicate with people on a much more targeted level. If you're able to find those specific groups of people that you can be open and honest with, I think it helps you also be willing to share that sometimes in a much more public forum. So, the miscarriage idea isn't something I obviously would struggle with, but as a 43-year-old white man who has dealt with depression, sometimes it's not always easy for me to just go out and say things publicly
Mm-hmm.
about how I've dealt with that, because there is white privilege and there's still other people who will say, well, you're still working, or you don't have to struggle with, looking behind your back every time you see a police officer kind of thing,
You
right?
don't want to
You
seem
know,
like you're complaining or claiming you're not blessed,
exactly,
but
exactly.
you're still going
So
to own that pain.
I do. So that's why I'm saying that sometimes finding groups are a really good avenue for that, because you know that you're talking to like-minded people, and once you're sharing those stories, and once you're continuing that sense of being vulnerable, then that fear really goes away, and then sometimes you're not as afraid to talk about those things in a much more public forum,
I love
where,
that.
right, so you can share on your page, hey, I've been dealing with XYZ, and if any haters come up, well, that's fine, but you've already dealt with the initial vulnerable conversation that now becomes easier for you to share that. And regardless of what other people say, somebody's still going to hear it. And somebody's still going to take that comment or that message, and it's going to resonate with them. And it's going to give them that sense of, I can overcome this too, because Jeff did, or Christine did, or Chris did, or Brian, or whoever it might be. Hey, they struggle with this too. That resonates with me. I have the courage now to also do the same thing.
What kind of groups have been especially helpful for you, and how did you find them?
There's one in particular. It's just about overcoming mental health. It's actually started as a David Bowie fan group,
Oh, wow.
and kind of
It's funny how
transitioned
things
into.
evolve like that.
I know it's weird. Kind of transitioned into people who are kind of struggling with anxiety or isolationism, or imposter syndrome, things like that. And it was good for me to know that. I mean, I always knew that I wasn't alone in this, but being able to freely share some things that I know that I'm struggling with in a place where, I know that there are a bunch of other like-minded people who aren't going to just judge me for what I'm feeling. And so that was one group. There have been a few others, like, as funny as this sounds, there are a few like Star Wars groups that have been quite healing, mostly because you deal with toxic people in certain fan groups, dealing with all kinds of stuff, right? And
The internet has a lot of toxicity on it.
exactly. And so sometimes you can get into like arguments over things that don't matter, and they're just fans of some sort of fictional characters, but they uncover some real ugly truths about who we are as humanity. And so sometimes when you're getting into those conversations, some of those groups have actually helped me be more measured, but then also have a better idea of where somebody else is coming from. And
Meaning, even just dealing with their toxicity
yeah,
has helped you be able to have more strength in your vulnerability. That's interesting. So
yeah.
can you kind of break that down a little bit, because I find that fascinating.
Well, there's a certain sense of grace that you have to have when you're dealing with people who are being toxic. You know, sometimes, especially in sort of more recent events over the last few months, isolationism is breeding toxicity
Yes.
in lots of, and people are getting frustrated. And no matter how awful you're seeing some people be, um, and even though I've said certain things, well, that person's just being an idiot, sometimes I have to take a step back and say, well, they're frustrated, they're angry, they feel like this or they feel that, and they're blowing up, and this is the only way that they know how to react, because either they haven't had an outlet to share their feelings, or they've never been told that it's okay to not act out in anger or whatever.
Yeah.
But so when you're seeing somebody else be toxic, that's almost a sense of them being vulnerable.
Yeah.
They
Hurt people
they don't
hurting.
know it. Yeah, they may just feel like they're standing up for their rights, or being toxic against another people group or another person, but inside their outward action is showing their vulnerability.
Yeah.
That, hey, I'm really hurting and I'm struggling with something, but this is the only way that I know how to act, and so this is how it's coming out.
Yeah, because people who are doing great do not attack other people.
Typically,
Generally.
typically.
Depends.
Generally, yeah, generally speaking, that's not how it works, but so that's taking me a little bit to take a step back and say, take a deep breath and say, okay, this person's hurting about something that's going on, and I wish they could get some help. You know,
And that can also
maybe someday they will.
and that can also help you give grace to yourself too. I mean, I
Yeah.
know that I've looked at, especially during this time of quarantine. I've been through like a million different mental states like per day during
Yes.
the
Yeah.
past few months.
Within the last hour.
And I'm someone who has dealt for many, many years with depression and anxiety and with therapy. So,
Yeah.
like, at first I was thinking, I sort of almost have an advantage here because I have coping mechanisms. I've had to
Sure.
discover my coping mechanisms, whereas people where things have always been kind of hunky dory, and now this is
Yeah.
happening to the world, they don't know what to do. But it's been interesting because it doesn't mean that the reactions don't happen. Like, I
Right.
found myself being nasty or just being, or being whatever and inclined to be a certain way or judging
Right.
somebody. And I've had to say to myself, okay, what is this really?
Right.
Deal with that with yourself
Yeah.
before you go vomiting it out on other people because what you're talking about is not what you're actually talking about. What you're attacking is
Right.
not what you're actually attacking.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's I wish other people would understand that and see that. I wish I wish there are certain people that would recognize the need for mental health professionals in their life,
Yeah.
or at least somebody that they can talk to. But one other group that I wanted to touch on is there's a group called Peaceful Parenting
Oh,
or the Peaceful Parent that has helped me. Now I'm not always good at this because I'm still struggling as a parent, but it's helped me parent a little bit better. And that combined with some really amazing efforts on my wife's part, the two of us have really come together to try and do our best to parent in this situation because you know we never dealt with anything like this, and all of a sudden we have four children who haven't been in school since April, and are trying to do online school, and their sports are gone, and they don't see their friends, and so like, what do you do?
yeah.
And so your typical parenting techniques aren't as effective because nobody's done this before.
Yeah, it's
There's
one
no
thing for
roadmap to
our
this.
whole world to shift. I mean, it's one thing if you're an adult because your world has, in theory, shifted many times by
Yeah,
the time you're like our ages. But the fact
yeah,
is, when you're a kid, you probably, in most cases, there are kids who, of course, have. There are kids out there who have had more shifts in their life than I have at nearly
right,
40. But the fact is, with kids, they're used to one of the biggest things you can give a child is a sense of security,
right,
and suddenly it's hard to give that. So
yeah.
so how do you deal with what you're going through yourself first
hmm
so that you can also give them what they need?
Which is one of the reasons why being vulnerable in the certain groups or online has been helpful because it sort of helps you get through some of that. So when you're home, you're able to kind of focus in on what your kids need from you, which is a attentive, loving parent who is trying to answer their questions the best they can. Look, I've got a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 6 and a 5-year-old, and it's like, what do you say to them?
They're asking very different questions and they can handle
Yeah,
very different levels of information.
yeah. My oldest is super chill, and he's starting driver's training, and we're going driving tomorrow, and then the next oldest is just like me and super super sharp and super intelligent, and she's asking some very mature questions, for a 12-year-old girl, and it's like, I'm still trying to just figure out how to not lose it on some idiots who are saying stupid things online, and now I'm also trying to parent well in a situation that nobody's ever dealt with before.
And there's also a
Um,
really big balancing act there
yeah,
between you don't want to show up as a mess to your children because that just takes away their comfort and stability even
yeah,
more. It's like, well, if I can't count on this person who's my rock, what's going on? But on the
yeah,
other hand, this is also a good opportunity. to show that you're
Yeah.
human and to show that
Hmm.
you're dealing with stuff too. I've been a little too human to my children lately, but
Yeah.
I felt that it's important for them to understand that they're not the only people going through this,
Yeah.
that daddy and I have our own stresses
Mm.
because of this situation. And, we
Yeah.
all need to pull together as a team, kind of. But that's a really
Yeah.
tricky balance, how much honesty versus stability do you put in
Well,
it?
I look at it as the same sense of vulnerability that you're trying to build online. It's also more important to have that same vulnerability when you're in the home.
I like that.
The Yeah, I mean, you want to be their parent and you want to set rules and you want to tell them what they need to do. And that's kind of where, unfortunately, that's sort of where I land on first is, hey, you need to do this. Can you do the dishes or fold the laundry or whatever? Um, but for me, I've got to continually learn and remind myself that um, they need a parent, but they also need that stable voice in their life that's kind of help them go forward through not just this time, but once everything kind of opens up, they're going to need to relearn those social skills again that they haven't really exercised for the last 3 months. So once sort of things go back to some sense of normal, they're going to need us even more because they're going to be overstimulated.
That's a
You know,
really good point.
yeah. So I guess it's my job and my wife's job to, um, yeah, we got to parent and we got to set some boundaries and a schedule. But um, for me anyway, I think it's they also need to know that you're a human and that you're going to be the safe place for them, and vice versa. I think sometimes we can, depending on how old your kids are, I think it's okay to lean on them a little bit too and
Hmm.
say, hey, your dad's really having a hard time today with X, Y, Z, and I'm sorry, and can I talk to you about it?
Yeah. I've apologized to my kids several times for yelling, and I've been like, you know
Yeah,
what? It's not about you. I'm stressed out. I'm having some feelings about XYZ,
yeah,
and I want you to know that, it wasn't that you did anything wrong,
yeah.
and of course we try to limit that, but at the same time, owning it is really important so they're not left wondering.
But we're all human, and it's okay to acknowledge that, man, I was a crappy parent today, or I was a crappy coworker today, or a
Hmm.
crappy wife or husband because of X, Y, Z. But you learn from it and you move on. And those things are okay to share online too, because I think it's important that other people know that, yeah, there are other parents are struggling too. I mean, I do get some comfort knowing that, especially in that peaceful parent group, that there are other dads that are like, this sucks, and I don't know how to navigate this. Um, and it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay there.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. One more time for the people in the back.
It's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to stay there.
I really like that. That's perfect. One last thing that I want to ask is
Yeah.
like myself, you are also in marketing, you are also
Mm-hmm.
a public speaker, you do all these things that are that really kind of blur the personal and professional because you have a personal brand. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do you balance sort of what you bring to that table? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there was a time that my personal brand was kind of snarky on Facebook, and it was super professional on LinkedIn, and it was kind of political on Twitter,
You were that
and
meme split into four different pictures that Dolly
yeah,
Parton did.
yeah, and yeah, that's true. And I forgot about that meme. So that's kind of where I was, and now I'm trying to be more myself and more human and tactile on Facebook and LinkedIn, trying to be more approachable and not shut people away. And the branding stuff, I think more people need more relationships right now than they need branding messages showing up in their feeds. I'd rather be the relationship builder at this point rather than trying to promote something. Um, there'll be time for the conversations of, how to sell or how to market or how to gain more clients and conversions and things like that. But I think right now just people need to know that people care and that we'll all get through this if we just maintain our humanity.
I like that. That's really what it's all about. It's about that humanity,
Yeah,
making people feel comfortable to approach you on a human level.
correct. Yeah,
Love that. All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Jeff. I think this was a very important conversation to have
yeah.
and to give voice to for other people who may be feeling this way as well. So, where can people find you?
Just search anywhere for at Jeff Howell 76. You'll find me anywhere that way.
Yep.
It's typically where I'm at.
You don't keep it mysterious, and that's good.
Uh,
Me neither. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. Again, this is social. I do this every week. This year I've been doing monthly themes, and May is Mental Health Month, which is why we've been having a lot of conversations this month here in this space about the connection between mental health and social media. It can at times be a fraught connection, but it can also be a lifeline. So next week I have Damian Ross coming on.
oh,
He has
he's a good
been
dude.
he shares videos every single day, short videos, very intimate, very personal videos, which have at times been really raw about things that he's been going through, including depression, including all sorts of personal things. And so I'm going to be talking to him about that sharing and about how he's found a safe place for himself where social media doesn't become something that makes things worse, because of course I'm sure he's gotten some flack online, I'm sure he's gotten some trolls. How
Just
to
a
make
little.
how to make it a place of connection rather than a place of slings and arrows, as it were.
Yes.
So join us next week for that. Bye.